Members, this is the appointed time and we have a quorum. This is the Bills Committee on the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017, and this is our first meeting, and we should elect the chairman first. Nominations, please. Mr. Martin Liao. I nominate Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Yes, and Mr. Ronald Chan seconds. Elizabeth Quat, you accept the nomination? Okay. Any other nominations? Ms. Tanya Chan? I nominate Dr. Kenneth Leung. Anyone seconds? Mr. Charles Mott seconds. Dr. Kenneth Leung, do you accept the nomination? Yes. Any other nominations? Mr. Eddie Chu? Mr. Ted Hui? All right, anyone seconds? Dr. Edward Yu seconds. Mr. Ted Hui, do you accept? Yes. Any other nominations? Anyone? If not, I'll stop the nominations, and so far we have 3 candidates.
I
think we are all familiar with the procedures, but I need to just go through the motions. You should use the chop to fix the. You should fix the chop on the ballot paper. Dr. Elizabeth Quat is number 1, and then Kenneth Leung number 2, and then Mr. Ted Hui number 3. After I announce that the voting is closed, and I haven't done it yet, I will stop distributing ballot papers, and the Secretariat will collect ballot papers from you, and you're required to put the ballot papers into the box in person. And before you do so, please don't leave your seat. Have you received the ballot papers? If so, after you affix the chop, I will close the voting process. All right, and we'll collect the ballot papers. The 3 persons making nominations, please come out to do the vote, to witness the vote counting. Mr. Martin Liao, Ms. Tanya Chen, and Mr. Eddie Chu, please. Just mix it first. Put them all in and mix it. I'm sorry, voting is closed. We've distributed the 13 ballot papers. Let's count the number of ballot papers collected.
Okay, 收返13。好啦，咁
We've collected 13 ballot papers. So shake the box a bit, and then we can count the votes. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 3. Number 3. Number 2. Number 3. Number 3. Number 2. Number 2. So close. So Dr. Elizabeth Quad, 4 votes. Dr. Kenneth Leung, 5 votes. Mr. Ted Hui, number 3, 4 votes. Dr. Kenneth Leung is elected chairman. Members, do we need to elect a deputy chairman? No? Yes? Any nominations? Mr. Martin Liao, Dr. Elizabeth Quad. To accept the nomination, who seconds? Mr. Ronald Chen. All right. Any other nominations? So congratulations, Dr. Elizabeth Quad is Deputy Chair of the Bills Committee. Now we should invite the administration in. Good morning. Representatives from the administration, before you brief us on the policy issues of this bill, we need to deal with a letter. Ms. Lau Siu Lai has written to the Secretariat and expressed her wish to join the Bills Committee. As her application is not made out of time because she was out of Hong Kong or she was unwell, I need to ask members to decide whether to allow Ms. Lau Siu Lai to join the Bills Committee. Does any member wish to express the views? Is there any objection to allowing Ms. Lau Siu Lai to join the Bills Committee? If not, then I declare that Ms. Lau Siu Lai will be allowed to join the Bills Committee. So that's done. I will invite the administration to walk us through this bill, that is the Protection of the Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017. Over to you, Mr. Tong. Members, good morning. On the 14th of June 2017, the Secretary for the Environment in the Council moved that the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017 be read the second time to amend Cap 586, Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Ordinance, to take forward a plan earlier announced by the government. That is a three-step plan to enhance regulation on import and re-export of elephant ivory, and also to increase the penalties under the ordinance. And myself and my team will be discussing the bill with members and to answer members' questions to facilitate members' understanding of the bill. Illegal killing of animals and smuggling of ivory has threatened the existence of African elephants, and there have been increased calls from the international community to phase out the ivory trade, including the State Council of the PRC, and Hong Kong must also respond to the international obligations as a member of the Convention of the International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And we propose that on the day of passage of the bill, we'll ban the import and re-export of all elephant hunting trophies and remaining post-convention items. And for 3 months later, we're going to ban the activities relating to pre-convention ivory. And for step 3, we'll ban the possession for commercial purposes of all ivory. And all current exceptions permitted under the CITES would continue, and such trade of antique ivory will continue to be allowed, and this is in line with the international practice. At the same time, we also propose to amend the ordinance to increase the penalties relating to illegal activities of involving wildlife trade, including trade of ivory. We wish to emphasize that no compensation should be made to the ivory trade. Well, because when the total ban comes into effect on the 31st of December 2021, from the time when the announcement was first made, there will be a grace period of 5 years for them to undergo business transformation. And also, in the global community, there is no compensation arrangements in implementing the ban on ivory trade. If we provide compensation to the affected parties, it may cause more elephants to be killed, and also more poaching activities, so that compensation can be made out. And this will undermine our effort in banning the ivory trade and illegal trading of endangered species. It will also affect our international image. We considered that we have ample justification in implementing the ban, and this is a response to an international call for closure of all domestic markets for ivory trade and also endangered species in the world. And in fact, we have just intercepted the import of the largest consignment of ivory artifacts to Hong Kong, amounting to 7,200 kilograms by the Customs and Excise. We need to send a strong message to the those ivory poaching activities that we are going to respond to the international call, and we will combat the illegal wildlife trade, including ivory. I urge members to support our proposal and pass the bill. We'll be happy to answer members' questions. Thank you, Mr. Tong. Any questions from members? Mr. Ban Chen? 5 minutes each. Mr. Ban Chen first. I must emphasize that we support full ban of trading of all ivory products, and also to protect our environment. I'd like to have some information from the administration so that so as to facilitate the scrutiny of the bill. And earlier, the public hearing, according to the administration, in Europe, both pre-convention ivory and post-convention ivory trade has been banned, and that includes UK, Germany, France, and Netherlands. And when was the ban of import and export of ivory introduced? I don't just want a verbal reply. I want something in writing for the Bills Committee's consideration and to facilitate our understanding. Second point, I'd like to have this information from the administration, namely some figures. After signing the convention in Hong Kong, we have had a batch of or a consignment discovered in Hong Kong?
Well, apparently, these were imported into Hong Kong from Europe. So with regard to this batch of ivory items, so how many were approved by the administration and how many still remains in the Hong Kong market? And also, when compared to the pre-convention ivory, what's the difference in terms of treatment? Because according to the ivory trade, well, actually for the inventory before the convention, they were not allowed to be exported. But then for those from Europe, they would be allowed to be exported from Hong Kong. So the administration has been saying that it has allowed for over 10 years for the trade to sell off or to clear those items. But then is it that we still have quite a large number of European ivory, and as a result, we have not been able to clear the inventory, and also for the compensation to the PL or licensees to possess, or the so-called ex gratia payment. To what extent would that result in further poaching of elephants? Because the administration is claiming that a grace period of 5 years would be allowed, but then there would still be a lot of trading taking place during the 5-year period. And if the administration continues to offer the ex gratia payment to these licensees so that they would be surrendering their licenses, then there would be no further trading in the market, and that would be affording better protection to our elephants. So how come you are still offering this grace period of 5 years? And then you say that you're not going to compensate them, because for the licensees, in terms of what they are asking for, they are not asking for too much. I think it's very simple. I've already submitted a proposal to the administration for consideration. All right, you're offering this ex gratia payment to the existing licensees. You're not really buying back the ivory items from them, because if you buy back the ivory items from the traders, then you would be sending out a signal to the international community that you're actually inviting them to do so. But then if you're just resuming their license, and then you can also shorten the grace period of 5 years, would that actually result in better protection for the elephants? Can you answer these questions first, Mr. Tong? Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your questions. You talk about the ban from the information about the bans imposed elsewhere. We'll provide that later. With regard to the import of ivory and also the sales of ivory, and also the proposal to offer ex gratia payment to the licensees, I'll defer to my colleague, Dr. So. Thank you. I'd like to take the opportunity to explain a bit on the situation regarding ivory trading with regard to regulation and also the situation under the convention. In fact, there are several types of ivory. We can also classify them into 3 main categories. We can call them pre-convention ivory. In other words, before the commencement of the convention, they were already imported into Hong Kong. And then there were also the pre-ban ivory. In other words, in Hong Kong and in the international community before the ban was imposed, they were already licensed. And then we have the post-convention ivory. And just now, Mr. Chen referred to the situation with regard to the trade. Apparently, he was referring to the pre-convention ivory. According to the convention, in other words, starting from 1975, a ban was imposed on Asian elephants, and then in 1975 there was a ban imposed on African ivory. So before 1975 or if there were Asian ivory, and then before 1976, if there were African ivory imported into Hong Kong, then they would be permitted, because Hong Kong is a party to CITES. So under the convention, for any pre-convention ivory in the international community, it would be allowed to be traded. But then that would be subject to certain regulations. For example, by way of license, before such international trading would be permitted. So by that we mean the pre-convention ivory. I think that was what Mr. Chen was referring to. But then after the ban was imposed, there was an exemption, and therefore they would continue to be allowed into Hong Kong because given the fact that they were somewhat different from the other ivory items, they would be permitted to be imported and exported from Hong Kong. So even after the international ban was imposed, these items will continue to be permitted into and out of Hong Kong. Next, Professor Edward Yu. Thank you, Chairman. In fact, I'd like to ask the administration, because repeatedly they have said that there was no question of confiscation of existing ivory items, and they would still be permitted for use in non-commercial settings. In other words, if they organize an exhibition and then they just charge admission fee without really selling them, then, well, for the collection that they still have, they will still be able to get commercial revenue from whatever they possess without engaging in any trading. So would that still be permitted under the existing legislation or legislative proposal? Yes, thank you, Professor Yu, for your question. Well, our objective is to ban the use of ivory for commercial purposes. So for any commercial activities, including the use of ivory in any exhibition, if it's a commercial act, then that would not be permitted. But then under the amendment bill, well, for education and also scientific research and so on, those would be permitted. In other words, if it's a commercial exhibition, then that would be caught up by the proposed legislation. Yes, Professor Yu, please continue. Okay, just to follow up. Okay, if it's not a commercial exhibition, but then they will still have to pay for the rent for the venue, and then if they receive donation, then how would you view it? Would that be permitted? Dr. So? Well, let me try and answer the question. Well, under the bill, the way it is drafted, after the enactment of the law, in particular upon the commencement of Step 3, no further permit would be issued to anybody for commercial possession of such ivory items. So that would depend on the merits of the case. For example, if we have collected sufficient evidence to show that the so-called exhibition does have a commercial flavor, and if the evidence is sufficient, then we will seek advice from the DFJ for taking up prosecution. But then if the exhibition doesn't have any commercial flavor, then it would not be a problem. As the Permanent Secretary just said, if it's for scientific research or for promotion of, say, conservation and so on, then that would not be a problem. So basically, we will have to look at the merits of the case to see if there is any commercial element in the staging of the exhibition. Any follow-up? Any further questions? None? Before we move on to clause-by-clause examination, I'd like to ask members, is there a need for us to invite the public to take part in a public hearing? Mr. Ben Chen, yes, I do call for a public hearing to be held, and I've also asked for some further papers, and if the administration is able to provide the information, please do so now, or else we should start the clause-by-clause examination next time. And I'd also like to ask further questions. So I hope that we can be given more time to ask questions. Yes, Ms. Tanya Chen. Sorry, Chairman. I respect the wish to collect views, but then as the chair of the Environmental Affairs Panel, I'd like to say this. Well, a month ago, well, today is the 6th of July, and about a month ago, that's the 6th of June, and we just had a public hearing, and on the day of the hearing, I couldn't remember exactly how long it lasted, but then I remember it lasted for 3 hours, Yes. And if my memory serves me right, actually, well, environmental groups were present, and even from Africa, from some national park, well, there were guards coming to Hong Kong, and there were also experts and also some ivory traders and practitioners. Well, at the complaints division and also at the public hearing, we met them on different occasions. And I think in paragraph 15 of the background brief prepared by the Secretariat, I think that was also set out. So that's by way of information for members. So do we really need to have another hearing within a month or two's time on this very subject? Okay, so how many deputations attended the public hearing? So can we be given more detailed information? So which groups attended, for example? Thank you, Chairman. Well, the public hearing lasted for about 3 hours. 16 deputations and 19 individuals attended. We can provide a list of the attendees to members, so we can actually make copies of that list and circulate it to members right away. Mr. Ben Chan, on the previous public hearings and also the complaint cases to the complaints division, it shows that there was extensive public concern about this. And given that, before we enact any legislation, I think we should hear what the public have to say on this. And there are also some ivory licensees. Well, during the last hearing, they were not able to find time to attend our hearing. That's why they would very much like to have another opportunity to come before the Bills Committee so that they'd be able to express their views before us. And I also think that while we are enacting a piece of legislation which may have an impact on other people's livelihood, it's only right that we should listen to their views. And I believe that at the public hearing, a lot of comments have been made, and all they were asking was for further information to be provided. And of course, after the public hearing, many things have happened. I think it's only right that we should take on board their views before enacting the legislation. I think that would be more appropriate, okay? All right, the Secretariat has given us a date, a possible date for our next meeting, and another slot is 24th of July is a Monday. 24th of July, 2:30 is a Monday. So I wonder if members would be prepared to have a public hearing during the summer break. Would that constitute any inconvenience to you? Or would that result in many members not being able to attend? Okay. We can also arrange for it to be held in August or even September, because we'd like to expedite the passage of this bill, but then all the procedures will have to be followed, okay? What if it's held on the 24th of July in the afternoon? Would there be problems for members? No? No comment? Yes, Mr. Charles Mock. Chairman, please take a look at who might not be available, because, well, some might have gone to Israel, Junius Ho, myself, Edward Yu, and also Elizabeth Quota said she would also not be in town. So quite a number of members might be out of town, okay? Elvin Young, Lo Wai Kwok. Okay, noted. So what about 2 further slots? Okay, 24th of July. You have reserved that slot. Is that right? In fact, we can also reserve 2 further slots, and then we can also circulate the dates to members to see which date would be the best. Yes, good morning. Just now, Ms. Tanya Chen said that there was a public hearing held in June. And of course, Mr. Leung, if you'd like to have another public hearing, well, I respect that, but because that's due process, but then would that be too close in between? So a hearing in June and then another one in July. So do we really need to complete the whole process before August.
唔該你啊，好啊，主席。
Mr. Tong, our goal is to have the bill passed by the Legislative Council as soon as possible so that we can implement the proposal and answer the international's call and fulfill our obligations in protecting elephants. And we also want to give more time for the trade to adjust to the new proposal, but we will be happy to follow the Legco's arrangement. So it is the government's goal to do it as soon as possible. What about your goal, Chairman? Well, I chair this meeting also with the same goal, that is to have the bill passed as soon as possible. But I listen to views from other members. Let's say we have a public hearing in July, and then we move on to clause-by-clause scrutiny. How much time would it take? Well, if members agree that as a matter of due process we should hold a public hearing, then I'm not going to start the clause-by-clause scrutiny today, because the bill itself is not that complex. If there are no controversies after the public hearing, I believe that after the public hearing that day, immediately following that, or perhaps at another meeting, we should be able to complete the clause-by-clause scrutiny. But what we're discussing now is when we should conduct the public hearing. Well, Dr. Elizabeth Quat, followed by Mr. Ted Hui. Well, Chairman, we just held a public hearing last month. Many individuals and trade representatives attended, and meanwhile we also received numerous emails, and I believe the Secretariat also received numerous emails and telephone calls asking for meetings, etc. Well, yesterday we had an unprecedented case of ivory smuggling seized involving some 3,000 elephants. But apart from that case, I don't see how circumstances have changed comparing to what happened at a public hearing a month ago. So if we want to implement this proposal as soon as possible, I think we can ask for written submissions from the public instead of another public hearing, and that's my view. Mr. Ted Hui. Before the meeting, through the media, I understand that members here would like to move amendments to the bill in the capacity of the Bills Committee or in the member's own capacity. Mr. Ban Chen, for example, may have his own views, and I think that we are going to discuss the amendments anyway. Shouldn't we proceed with this discussion first, so that we know if the amendments are feasible, so that we have more time for the administration to research on the relevant matter and how relevant it is with the views of the deputations attending the public hearing. I think that can make our meetings more effective. Perhaps Mr. Ban Chan can put forward his proposed amendments for our discussion first. But before we receive the amendment in writing, I don't think it's appropriate to discuss the amendments now. Who else would like to speak? Ms. Tanya Chen and then Mr. Ban Chen. Thank you. I think Mr. Ted Hui also understands that amendments may be moved without notice, in fact, as long as they're moved at the appropriate times. My view is that I hope to conclude the scrutiny as soon as possible. Chairman, can you just set out a number of dates? I understand that we're going on a duty visit in Israel, so I hope that it can be held either before or after the visit. We need to have a quorum, and if we are to hold a public hearing, we need to meet the quorum requirement. I understand that Mr. Ban Chen asked similar questions at the panel, because I am the chair of that panel, and then the administration can perhaps give information to him as soon as possible, since the information sort is similar, so that we can complete the work as soon as possible. Mr. Kwok just now also pointed out that there have not been any substantial change in the past few months. I don't think that in the future, in the near future, there is going to be a major change. So the views will by and large be the same. I hope that if a public hearing is to be held, it can be held as soon as possible, with all the written responses from the administration ready, so that we can move on to the clause-by-clause scrutiny as soon as possible. We welcome meetings in July, August, and even September. Mr. Ben Chan, whether or not I am going to move an amendment depends on the written response from the administration. I don't need a reminder from other members. If necessary, I'll give it a thought. If I haven't made this proposal, I don't need other members to propose it on my behalf. Now, at the moment, I believe that there are strong views from the trade, and I believe these views should be heard. We are stifling the business of the trade, and I think as a matter of procedure, we should listen to their views first. And let's say if the government is willing to pay ex gratia payment to the trade so that in return, they can do away with the 5-year grace period, we can expedite our progress on the total trade ban. So why can't we just spend a little bit of time, and why can't the government be all open-minded so that in the next 5 years there won't be any ivory trading activities? Well, if we plan to ban the ivory trading or any commercial activities, and why can't we think about something that can shorten the grace period or even do away with the grace period? Why are we still allowing trading of ivory within the 5 years? We should not hurry ourselves into this proposal. If I could come up with an agreement with the trade, then wouldn't it be a better way to protect elephants? Ms. Tanya Chan? Please continue. I can't say this on behalf of the government, but I think that the government's position on the ex gratia payment is very clear. The greatest controversy, according to Mr. Ban Chan, is that for the sake of protecting elephants, the major controversy is only about compensation. I don't know whether the government is going to all of a sudden backtrack and kowtow. I understand the issue. I hope that the grace period could be shortened to 2 or 3 years. But I understand that for the license to possess, the validity period is 5 years, and the government's hands are therefore tied. I hope the government can also clarify whether there is any chance of a compensation agreement. We can continue to listen to the views of the trade, but at the same time, I'd like to hear from the administration how they would help the trade to transform its business. Last time we heard some views on this issue. Perhaps the administration can give us a response in writing, or perhaps if you're ready, you can give a response now, if not a response in writing later. But anyway, Chairman, I'll work with your timetables. I can have a meeting in the middle of the night. So I think the major issue is whether we need a public hearing and whether and when to hold a public hearing. I was also present at the last public hearing. I don't want members to put this issue to a vote. I would like to have it done as soon as possible, and if possible, I hope that we can have a public hearing during the summer recess. Whether it should be held in July, August, and September, perhaps we can find some available slots during the 3 months. I don't think many members would opt for a public hearing in July because we just had one last month. All right, so July to September. Give some time to the Secretariat to invite deputations. So let's pick a date respectively in July, August, and September and see when we can have a larger quorum. Ms. Lau Siu Lai, I think it'd be a good idea to have a public hearing. I'm not quite familiar with the views of the deputations, but during summer I know that many members are out of Hong Kong. For me, it should be made before the 21st of July, and I'll be back after the 5th of August. So we'll pick a date that works in July as soon as possible, and similarly 2 other days in August and September respectively for members' reference. And once we reach a decision, we'll hold a public hearing on a date when the majority of members could attend. I understand that there are arguments from both sides. On the one hand, we just had a public hearing, and on the other hand, the trade has expressed concerns. So on the public hearing arrangement, any other views? So, yes, Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Can I ask questions now? Well, I was about to ask the administration about when they can submit a written response, and then I'll let you ask your question. Mr. Tong, you just heard the concerns of members, and you understand that we would like to pass a bill as soon as possible. But one hurdle is that we need information from you. For example, Mr. Ben Chan just now asked for some written response. When are you going to make it available? I thank members for supporting the passage of the bill as soon as possible. And we'll try to do it within 1 week. We will forward our papers to the Secretariat. And if I may, Chairman, I also like to respond to the issue about the LP. Well, the objective in general is that I think the major direction is that around the world there hasn't been any jurisdiction which offers compensation to the trade for implementing the international convention. And that includes the central authorities of the mainland and other jurisdictions. And that's the most important principle. If we offer compensation, we are going to encourage elephant poaching activities. So we consider that any form of compensation, well, including the buying out licenses, are after all compensation, and we do have very strong reservations. In fact, it's very likely that we're going to object to such ideas. We can go back and consider the suggestions, but in general, we believe that these suggestions are contrary to our objective. I'll give each member 5 minutes. We don't have many members here. I'll allow more time for members to ask questions. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung, followed by Mr. Ben Chan. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to have some information from the administration. For example, for the craftsmen in the trade, what is the average age and how many of them are there? I hope to have these figures for our consideration. And I also have some other questions. For step 3 of the bill, total ban will be introduced by the 31st of December 2021. So after that date, it will mean that all ivory will be banned from export or import or re-export in Hong Kong. I raise this issue because the reason why elephants have become an endangered species because of the ivory trade, smuggling, and we also have the responsibility of preventing further ivory poaching and smuggling. And after step 2 and 3 have been implemented, I'd like to know what monitoring effort would be made. Will there be the tracking down of ivory? Because this will help prevent smuggling. I want to know whether you have given it a thought and what is the situation.
Yes. Chairman, that's exactly what we were going to do. Because other than the three-step arrangement, so that by 2021, we'll be imposing a full ban on any commercial activity relating to ivory trading. As we have said, we'll be substantially increasing the penalty, and the increase will be pretty drastic. But then, as Mr. Kwok said, we would continue to be vigilant about any activities that would be going on. Well, for pre-convention ivory, post-convention ivory, and there would also be some exemption on possession of ivory, so there might be chances for people to fabricate the licenses and so on. That's why after 2021, after the full ban was imposed, then any commercial activity would be disallowed. So when the authorities undertake surveillance activities, that would be easier, and the situation would also be a lot clearer to the public. Yes, Dr. So. Well, we don't have anything to add for the time being. All right, thank you. Well, there was still smuggling activities recently, and of course for large quantities they have been seized or uncovered by customs people. But then, was there any evidence that they might be doing that in small quantity? So how are we going to eradicate such activities altogether? All right, I'll defer to Dr. So. Well, AFCD and the C&E department would be jointly responsible for enforcing the law, and as we have said at yesterday's press briefing, well, for the C&E department, for large quantities of smuggling activities, they would adopt a risk assessment approach in enforcing the law. As to whether or not they might be doing this in small quantities, indeed, that's possible. But then in yesterday's seizure and also press briefing, the C&E department also said that on previous occasions they would try to smuggle in ivory items, for example, through some transit passengers. The ivory or tusk would be hidden in some hidden compartments of luggage and so on. So the AFCD and the C&E department are fully aware of this. And let me briefly talk about what's been done by the AFCD within Hong Kong. Well, for shops engaging in illicit trading of ivory, well, the AFCD also conducted inspections and patrols. And we're also very concerned, and we also understand that, they would also be doing so in small quantities. Exactly because of this, we have also trained up some surveillance dogs. Well, these dogs have been trained up so that they'd be able to smell out the ivory, and as a result of that, at some air cargo transit centers, they've been able to detect the smell of ivory. And for our surveillance dogs, they've also been deployed at land crossings in order to achieve a deterrent effect, and also to prevent people from smuggling ivory in and out of the territory. Yes, Mr. Ben Chan, I'd like to put this to the AFCD officials. we don't want to encourage people to continue to smuggle ivory into Hong Kong, right? But then during the 5-year grace period, the message sent out to the international community would be that during the 5-year period, trading would continue to be allowed in Hong Kong. So will that be more meaningful than disallowing them to poach elephants, or should we ban it right away? But then we would offer ex gratia payment or compensation to the licensees. So which one would send out a clearer signal to Africa so that African elephants can be better protected? Well, Mr. Tong, well, I'll say a few words and then I'll defer to Dr. So. Well, should the government make compensation to the traders of ivory because of the ban? Well, to us, this is a very important consideration. If we send out any unclear signal, including the fact that we might consider compensating them, that would already give rise to illegal poaching of elephants, because they would try to smuggle ivory into Hong Kong before the ban takes effect. I think, Permanent Secretary, you have misunderstood me. Yes, you said that if we were to compensate the traders by weighing the inventory that they have, then that might give rise to misunderstanding in the international community. Well, I understand that, but then if you tell them that in the next 5 years we're not going to allow any ivory trading in Hong Kong, and at the same time we are offering this one-off compensation to the licensee so that we'll recover their licenses, which way is a better way to protect the elephants? Do you understand what I mean, Permanent Secretary? Well, let me try and answer the question and then I'll defer to the AFCD. Well, one of the things that we have considered in formulating the policy and also the legislation, one is very critical. If you look at international experience, that's at the point of import and export. Well, for pre-convention ivory, well, it would be allowed to be imported and exported. So that's one of the ways to cause confusion. So one of the things that we're going to do under the law is to ban this, and if it was to be implemented 3 months after the enactment, then any form of ivory would be banned from importing or exporting from Hong Kong. So that would send out a very clear signal. That is, we will no longer permit ivory to be imported into Hong Kong. That's a very clear signal. Yes, Dr. So? Well, purely looking at it from the perspective of African elephants and also conservation of elephants, of course, the earlier that we can implement the full ban, the better. So that is a full closure of the domestic market. But then, as pointed out by the Honourable Member, under the existing law, well, for all the licenses that have been issued, well, there is a 5-year period. That's why we allow the grace period to last for 5 years. So we have already been doing this as expeditiously as possible. As to whether or not the compensation might be able to shorten the period so that we might be able to do it better, well, yes, shortening it would be better. But then the message that will be sent out, as Mr. Tong and Mr. Au have correctly pointed out, that would send out the wrong message. And the wrong message would be that, well, for the live elephants and elephant groups in Africa would be facing a higher risk of poaching. So the view is not just held by the administration or the AFCD. If you've paid attention to some of the remarks made by the deputations at the earlier hearing, then you would have noticed that if we were to consider offering compensation, then the wrong message will be sent out. And then as a result of that, the elephant communities in Africa would be facing a higher risk of poaching. So we have to strike a balance between the different factors. That's why the package that we have put out would be the best, in our view, to protect the elephants in Africa. Mr. Ben Chan, Chairman, well, I don't think the explanation is acceptable. Because number one, in the next 5 years, Hong Kong will continue to have this local trade of elephants and elephant ivory. And if we were to discontinue the local market right away, but then at the same time we will be offering compensation to the traders, well, what kind of message would that send out? So we're trying to phase that out step by step, but then why can't we expedite the process? Because if you're able to expedite the process, then you're just offering compensation to the traders, but then the message will be even stronger. So you have not been able to convince me why offering them compensation would not be good. So you'll be telling the world that the domestic market will be closed immediately. How can that be wrong? So which one would be a better approach? Mr. Ben Chan, I've heard your question. I've also heard the answer from the administration. I think the crux of the matter is that, okay, Mr. Ben Chan, you're saying that, okay, you resume the license and then you offer the ex gratia payment right away. Under the law, can we do it? Is that feasible? Maybe our legal advisor and also your DFJ colleague can also comment on this. So will it be feasible under the law right now? Can you comment on that? On this point, is a policy matter. It's also a legal issue. As Mr. Tong pointed out just now, we have heard a lot of public views, because please understand that, well, the market information or market message is very confusing. Sorry, I have to make myself clearer. I'm saying that under the current law, okay, if you were to offer compensation, but then if it's not allowed under the current law, and then you will have to come up with another amendment bill in order to offer that compensation. Because under the existing legislation, is it possible to do what Mr. Chen just suggested? Okay, if we just offer $1 million to each PL holders, then would that be feasible? Because you might need to come up with another piece of legislation next year in order to do that. So that's my question. So is it possible under the current law? Yes, Chairman, to answer your question, it's not feasible. Okay. Mr. Ben Chan? So, I think you'll have to wait for your turn. We'll allow for other members to ask first. Yes, Mr. Charles Mock? Chairman, I'm just expressing my views. I think Mr. Ben Chan was also expressing his views. Well, he was of the view that if such ex gratia payment would be offered, then in his view, that would expedite the resolution of this problem. I don't think so, because I think the law and also the policy would be determined by the administration if they were to stop the trading of ivory with or without the compensation. Once the legislation is enacted, we can still stop the trading right away. But then the issue is the traders might be affected. That's true. It doesn't necessarily mean that by offering them compensation, we'll be able to settle the matter earlier. The time that will be taken to resolve the problem is not the crux of the matter, because with or without compensation, we can still do it across the board. But then the message sent out to the international community might be different. That is, within a particular period of time, we might actually see more trading activities, resulting in more people rushing to do certain things because you're offering compensation to them. So can the administration tell us whether that might actually be counterproductive, because that might become an incentive for more activities to take place, and as a result, more elephants might be hurt or killed? So I don't think what Mr. Chan suggested would be able to resolve the matter right away. So it's a policy issue. All right, if you don't offer any compensation, sorry, no compensation will be offered. It has nothing to do with the time that will be taken to end the trade. Thank you, Chairman. As I said at the beginning, very often the message to the market could be very confusing. I think the most important thing is for the Hong Kong administration, once we are determined to do something, what kind of message are we sending out to the international community and also to Africa, which is very far away from us, and the message can be very confusing. That's why the stance that we have held so far, we have heard many public views, and we have also looked at the experience elsewhere when they imposed the ban. Did they do anything similar to that? And that's why we took the policy decision. That is, we don't think we should offer any compensation at all.
As I said in my opening remarks, if we send out any message that we are going to, or at least we're going to consider making any form of compensation, such a message may already cause confusion, and some people may, because of this false message, poach elephants, because in some jurisdictions ivory ban is already in place, and the ivory items will be sent to Hong Kong, and this will undermine our effort in combating illegal ivory trading and just now, some members also mentioned that yesterday we seized such a large quantity of ivory, and we need to be very careful because we don't know the market situation. If it exacerbates ivory poaching, then we'll be going against the objective, and it will be totally wrong. I will not say outright that we're going to object to this idea, but at least I can say we have strong reservations because it is against our policy objective. Dr. Edward Yu. Well, Mr. Ben Chan used a very specific word. He didn't refer to compensation as such. He referred to ex gratia payment. So would the administration please explain the licensing policy and the relevant legislation first, whether you're empowered to terminate the license before the end of its validity period, and whether there is any provision that requires you to make ex gratia payment in such an event. Then we can see if there is any legal backing for you to terminate the license before its expiry. I ask this question because for the land resumption ordinance, it's very complex, and 12C provides a very complex mechanism on the price assessment and then compensation. And I agree with Chairman that we may need to enact another piece of legislation to deal with that. So I'd like the administration to explain the licensing policy first. Now, if it is possible, then we can just listen to Mr. Ben Chan and just revoke all licenses tomorrow so that we can have a total ban. Mr. Tong. To answer the honourable member's question, there may be different wording to describe the situation. You can call it ex gratia payment instead of compensation. But, well, I don't think even locals are able to distinguish the two. In fact, there is a major difference between the two. But I think that locals or even foreigners would not understand the difference, and if this message is sent out, then there will be a misunderstanding around the world, and this will undermine the objective of the bill. And I can refer to Dr. So to answer your question. According to CAP 586 Section 26, it provides very clearly that the license can be revoked. And also, in subsection 1, it provides the two circumstances under which the Director of Agricultural Services can revoke the license. That is for the licensee to reach the additional licensing condition. And the second condition, the director is satisfied that the license is issued because of a misrepresentation by the licensee. Other than these two circumstances, the director is not empowered to revoke any license. So I think we can stop the discussion on this point now, because there is no legal backing for us to discuss the ex gratia payment for terminating the license prematurely. Dr. Lau Siu-lai, having heard members' arguments, I think that the administration's point and the bill are quite clear. Because even if we step up inspection by having more Snoop dogs to check consignments, it's futile, because by that time the elephants would have been killed. That is why the more important thing is not to send out the wrong message. We should not let anyone to think that if we smuggle in more ivory, we'll get compensation, because by that time the elephants will have been killed already. We should not send out ambiguous message to the international community that there is a chance that any form of compensation may be made out. And we should also do our gatekeeping to make sure that the ivory items coming from killed elephants will not be able to be smuggled into Hong Kong. So if there is no difficulty in holding a public hearing, I think that it should be held before the 20th of July. Mr. Ben Chen. Chairman, your suggestion is that in the current legislation there is no provision on ex gratia payment. Of course, that is true, because we're talking about amending the bill, amending the ordinance. If this is included in the bill, then we can have such an arrangement. Otherwise, it would be peculiar to have such a provision in the ordinance. I don't think that there is any similar provision in other pieces of legislation. So we should not put the cart before the horse. What we're doing is to scrutinize the amendment bill and see how this arrangement can be incorporated. That means the government may move amendments to the bill. I think that's the normal procedure. I don't know if I have misunderstood the procedure. But anyway, just now the Permanent Secretary already made it clear that they don't want to send out the wrong message to the international community that compensation is possible in Hong Kong, so that all ivory items will be imported into Hong Kong. Of course, this will be catastrophic. But the other point is, if we allow trading activities to continue in the coming 5 years, then why won't you regard that as a wrong message sent to the international community as well? Basically, if you follow my suggestion and give ex gratia payment, this will be the end of the matter. You may say that we should stop the argument here, but I'm not convinced by the administration. And I have another question. Over the years, what is the quantity of ivory imported into Hong Kong? Why did the government allow that? Because I've been told that in some countries in Europe, for example, the total ban has been in place. And yet we still have ivory items going through UK to Hong Kong with the permission of the AFCD. We're talking about May last year. So why is it that in May last year we already knew that the government would introduce an ivory ban, and yet the government still permitted the import of such ivory consignment? P.S. After implementing Step 2 of our plan, basically, the import and re-export of all ivory will be banned. Unless it's illegal smuggling, and we're proposing to substantially increase the penalty to serve greater deterrence. By that time, the ivory products will still be able to be traded in Hong Kong because, as we mentioned, the LPs still have a validity period until the end of 2021. We still, therefore, allow the trade to conduct its business until then. As for the ex gratia payment, it is an administrative arrangement. It is not a legal arrangement. I understand that Mr. Chan may have very different views, but we reiterate that any form of compensation arrangement made out to the trade would cause a confusing message to be sent to the international community, which is contrary to our policy objective. The other point is, just now, about the figures requested, in due course we'll provide a written response to the Bills Committee. I want to clarify the question I just asked. As chairman, my position is neutral. I need to explain about Mr. Chan's question. Of course, there is no such ex gratia payment mechanism in the current legislation in the bill. However, if we refer to the long title, it says that
legislation to increase penalties of offence relating to the regulatory schedule species。第一個點，呢個係第一點。而第二點係 to provide stricter regulation for elephant hunting trophies and elephant ivory, and to make minor amendments。所以如果你要喺
So I just want to explain that if you want to do something about the license, and that's my point. If you want to revoke the license, I don't think this can be done within the scope of this bill. I just want to remind members that if you wish to move a CSA, you need to have regard to the long title. Chairman, of course, I understand. We may need the legal advisor to explain it. If ex gratia payment is given to ivory traders by the government, would it be outside the long title of the bill? Thank you, Mr. Chan, for a question. If you want to implement this in the bill, we need to have regard to the long title of the bill. And Chairman already explained the long title. The first point is that the penalties relating to the regulation of scheduled species will be increased. And if you wish to move an amendment, you need to refer to the long title of the bill. The long title sets out the scope of the bill. So the long title is to increase the penalties for offences relating to the regulation of scheduled species, to provide stricter regulation for elephant hunting trophies and elephant ivory, and to make minor amendments. We have yet to read the amendments of Mr. Ben Chan, but it seems that in terms of the ex gratia payment, it may not fall within the scope of the bill. But on the point of compensation, my view is that perhaps the administration should provide a paper on the legal point, because in relation of the total ban, I wonder if it's contrary to Article 6 and 105 of the Basic Law in relation to private property. I hope that the administration can give us a paper on this legal point, because it touches upon the Basic Law articles. Two members would like to ask questions. Ms. Tanya Chan, followed by Ms. Claudia Mo. Ms. Tanya Chan, thank you, legal advisor. Well, you are indeed giving us legal advice. Yes. Will the administration please respond to the point about the two articles in the Basic Law? I know that you must be ready, because this point isn't something new, but I thank the legal advisor for reminding us. And I also oppose any form of compensation or ex gratia payment, because let's say if there is extraordinary payment, then legislation will have to be enacted for this to be put in place, and this will create a window such that other places may may use this loophole. For PRC, the ban will be put in place by the end of this year, and we will create a loophole causing threats to the lives of elephants. And if you attended the public hearing and understood the life cycle of elephants, each elephant may only have 1 or 2 offsprings. And the lifespan is such, the life cycle is such that reproduction is not as easy as chicken and eggs. I don't think we should send out the wrong message such that we become the distribution ground in the world. This will tarnish our image in the global community. You don't need a response, right, Ms. Claudia Mo? I have a number of questions. First of all, it's 100% for me that the bill should be passed, because the People's Republic of China has already signed on to this international convention, and Hong Kong is part of China. I think it's beyond our imagination to say no to this international convention. Protection of endangered species is such a grand objective that nobody would object to it. But I do have 2 points on elucidation. The international undertaking made by the PRC is that by the 1st of January next year, there will be a total ban of the ivory trade in the mainland, whereas in Hong Kong, we're allowing a 5-year grace period. This is quite extraordinary, and in my view, quite long. Why is that? Let's say if I move an amendment to shorten the period to 3 years, and in fact, many global green groups have already called for an immediate ban. So let's say if 1 year is too short for you, what about 3 years? What's the government's position? Second point. Last month we had a public hearing and I was present.
So you said that you would not be considering any form of compensation at all, because at the time there were ivory traders present and some of them actually were in tears, and they complained very loudly, and they claim that they suffered a lot under the framework, and the administration insisted that there would be no compensation to be offered. And that being said, it's very hard for you to backtrack, because you don't want to give people the impression that you are erratic. So are you 100% sure that you would not be prepared to offer any compensation at all? So that's what I'd like to clarify. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Member, for your questions. Well, indeed, we'd like to do this more expeditiously so that we can impose the full ban before 2021. But then at the same time, we also have to respect the system under Cap 586. That is, once a license is issued to the licensee, and that's the license to process, and the validity of that license is 5 years. And since late last year, we announced the new policy, and if you count that from late last year, then any license issued since late last year would expire by 2021. So that's how it all came about. And as our AFCD colleague explained, well, some questions were also asked by Mr. Kwok. That is, during the next 5-year period, that is the license period. Well, is it possible for us to terminate the license prematurely? Well, there is very little flexibility under the law. unless the licensee have breached certain conditions or unless there are very special circumstances warranting this approach, it would be very hard for us to face up to the consequences if there is a litigation. So we believe that a 5-year would be appropriate, and at the same time that would also allow us more time for the trade to transform itself. We have no intention whatsoever to really hurt the trade or make them suffer. But then at the same time, we have other objectives to achieve. Also, permit me to say this very briefly. Well, just now, we also mentioned that in order to avoid sending out the wrong message, yes, I know that. That's why, from the policy perspective, we already announced that we had no intention of offering any form of compensation, and that's what we propose to do. Yes, we note that because at the public hearing last time, we also have park rangers from Africa, and they said that the way elephants are being poached right now, at the pace of how elephants are being killed in the next 10 years, according to the ranger, well, it's quite likely that elephants can disappear or become extinct in the world or in Africa. That's really very horrible and terrifying. And well, just now our legal advisor said, okay, AFCD, you're going to have a hard time under 139B. Well, not everybody is familiar with that. It's about private breeding of dogs in private premises. Ms. Claudia Mo, please speak on the subject. Sorry, I'm very uptight because I'm taking some medication because I'm not really feeling well. All right, under that provision, well, an individual has the right to deal with his own dog because under the basic law, the dog is his personal asset or property. So similarly, we're talking about very much the same thing. Okay, I have collected some ivory tusks underneath my bed. So this is my private property. So would the government be concerned that there might be judicial reviews against you? So that's my question. This is totally relevant. Ms. Mo. Well, the administration has already promised us that under Basic Law 105, that is for private property right of the individuals, they would be giving us its legal advice. So that's what we are concerned about. That's Basic Law 105 and also Basic Law Article 6. The administration already promised that they'd be coming back with a legal advice. So my question is, would they be concerned that there might be judicial reviews? Well, they would be giving us a legal advice, and that would also cover the issue of judicial reviews before they come up with any legal advice. Mr. Tong, would you mind giving a tentative response? Well, in considering the entire law, we were asked whether or not it might be in conflict with the basic law. Well, in considering any draft legislation, that's the necessary process that we have to go through. And I'll be asking the DFJ to supplement. Well, we have considered that, and we believe that our current arrangement would be appropriate because we have not attempted to ban it right away. We are just saying that, well, any commercial activities will be disallowed or banned. Mr. Fong. Thank you, Chairman. Well, as the Permanent Secretary said before the introduction of any legislation within the administration, we would conduct a constitutional review, and the legal policy unit of the DOJ already gave its view on the implications under Article 105 of the Basic Law, so we can also give that in writing later. All right, in your legal advice, would you be giving us the full legal advice, or will you be just giving us the summary? Because we'd like to get the full advice, because on BL6 and also BL 105. So can you give me personally the full legal advice? Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think some members have expressed their concerns recently. That is about the legal advice given by the DOJ. Well, that would be subject to legal privilege protection. So for any paper submitted to this council as to how much information we're going to give, well, can you give me your full legal advice? Is it possible? If that's the request by the chairman, since the DFJ is not the legal advisor of the LegCo, that's why we do not have the function of providing the full legal advice to this council. Well, I hope that it can be as detailed as possible, because there would be constitutional implications. So I hope that the legal advice can be as full and detailed as possible. Okay. Of course, the earlier legal advice would be a privileged document, but then I'm seeking your advice. So can you provide the legal advice to the Permanent Secretary as soon as possible, and then the Permanent Secretary can waive the legal privilege and provide that to us? So is that possible, Mr. Tong? Can you give us your response? Well, Chairman, we have heard that very loud and clear. That is, members are very concerned about the possible conflict with Basic Law 105 and 6, and if we do not explain that clearly, then I'm sure members will not let us off easily. So as to how much information should we provide to this council, of course the DFJ will be giving us legal advice. That is the legal advice to the administration. We will try to provide you as detailed and as full an information as possible. But then as to whether or not there might be a risk of judicial reviews, of course that can not be entirely eliminated. But then if we are able to put that out, we believe that there is no conflict whatsoever with the Basic Law. Okay, so please do provide us with a detailed legal advice, whether or not it's a new legal advice or not. So if you can show that to us, if you can waive that privilege, because we don't want to just see a summary. Okay, other than Claudia Mo, we also have Elizabeth Quart. Ms. Mo, well, I'll be very brief, because just now you read out the long title of the amendment bill. So do we have to print that out? Well, in a blue bill. How come I don't have the blue bill with me? Because yesterday I asked the Secretariat for the blue bill. So Secretariat, can I be given a copy of the blue bill? Okay, Claudia Mo, any further questions? No, no further questions. Elizabeth Quat, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to supplement on why we would be prepared to accept the 5-year grace period. Because in order to protect African elephants, I've talked to many conservation groups. A lot of work has been done in recent years. And of course, we'd like to do that in a year's time, like what our home country has done. I'd like to share with you what happened in the process, the reason why we had the Bills Committee meeting in the first place today. If we do not support this, then we should have besieged the council building so that we can impose the full ban in a year's time. But then we also understand that under Article 6 and 105 of the Basic Law, we do have to protect private property. And after many rounds of discussion with the administration, given the fact that licenses have been issued which had a validity period of 5 years, even if the administration were to recover the license, it would be subjected to a lot of challenge, because that might be in conflict with Article 105 of the Basic Law. That's why, after many rounds of discussion with the green groups, we believe that it would be appropriate, because even if we wanted to ban it in a year or two's time, if we were to face up to judicial reviews, that might be more problematic. That's why we'd rather that this law be passed as soon as possible, so that we would ban the import and export right away. And then we hope that the market, with less demand, then the market would die down more quickly, so that it can be phased out gradually, instead of rushing it through in a year or two's time. But then that would not be feasible, because it's simply not feasible. So it's with a lot of pain that we were prepared to accept it. We are of course very concerned that during the next 5 years there might be a window period whereby ivory smuggling and trading might still continue. That's why we will have to rely heavily on the administration acting as the gatekeeper to ensure that during the next 5 years window period, Hong Kong would not be turned into a paradise for ivory trading. That's very important. And Chairman, for the purpose of protecting elephants, I've been to Africa twice, and I've been keeping in contact with many green groups in Africa, and they've been receiving a lot of confusing messages during this recent period. In fact, that's what's happening. In fact, every day I've been asked that, well, are you going to offer compensation? Is it that the government will be buying back all the ivory items? In fact, that's been circulated in the international community, and every day I've been answering questions. I've been telling them that no, that's not true. We have no intention whatsoever to buy back these ivory items. But then when there is a huge profit, when there is a lot of attractive rumors going on, then it's hard to claim it out altogether. So will the administration be able to send out the correct message that no compensation will be offered in any form? And that's very critical in terms of protecting the elephants. That's why I personally have been in favor of enacting the legislation as soon as possible. And I'd also like to say this, and I hope that members will understand this. Hong Kong is not the first city or jurisdiction to ban the domestic trade in elephants or elephant ivory. We are not the last either. There are many cities which have faced similar pressure, and we have also passed legislation without any compensation. So we have to monitor it closely, and Hong Kong has become very much the focus of international attention. And if we were to offer compensation, then there would be a gap, and other cities will find it hard to face up to the same situation. So what we're going to do will be of critical importance to the conservation of wildlife, because we're going to influence what is going to take place. That's why we have to be very, very careful in expressing our views, and also for government officials making remarks. You would also have to be very careful.
Because we don't want to be a smuggling center for wildlife, and this is a crucial moment. Anything to add from the administration, Mr. Tong? We agree with Dr. Kwok's viewpoint. We must not send out any confusing message, and that is why we have not changed our position on compensation arrangement. Mr. Peter Shill, I'm sorry for being late, as I was engaged in another meeting. Last night there was a piece of news on ivory smuggling, and a large quantity of ivory was seized, and that is why there is a greater call for preventing Hong Kong to become a smuggling ground of ivory. In Hong Kong, we have murder cases, but we can't call everyone in Hong Kong murderers. For ivory smugglers that were arrested yesterday, we should not allow any tolerance, and the administration should penalize them, because it is the smugglers who put legal ivory trade businessmen in a plight. We've been discussing this issue for 2 years, and since we still have ivory trade in Hong Kong, there is incentive for people to poach elephants and to make ivory products, and this is, of course, not good. But the point is, previously, the administration has been issuing license to possess for traders to import ivory items into Hong Kong. You are now moving the goalposts such that in the future they will be banned from any trading activities of ivory, and it is definitely a contravention of the basic law. As we mentioned just many times before, during the Japanese War, some coupons were issued, and it's impossible to suggest that one should no longer be able to possess these coupons. I don't think it's a major trend to allow Hong Kong to be an ivory smuggling center. We're talking about the traditional ivory trade in Hong Kong, and ivory trading has all along been allowed in Hong Kong. We're talking about arts and we have craftsmen. Why can't possession be allowed? You know, for the rich, they may have ivory artifacts displayed in their homes, and it's art for them. You can say that in other jurisdictions, it's also the same. Trading activities are not allowed. But I want to emphasize that for these people overseas, they are not traders. They were not traders. They just bought the tusk for display at home. So, of course, if you ban ivory trading, no one would be affected because they were not engaged in the ivory trade. So if trading is not allowed, they would just put the ivory artifacts at home as long as you don't confiscate them. But in Hong Kong, it's different. We have a history. We have craftsmen, and if they want to craft an artifact, they need to buy materials. And by materials, I mean ivory. All along, this is permitted in Hong Kong. So this is unreasonable. Definitely for businessmen in the trade, they will have stock supply. So you cannot apply the practice around the world onto businessmen in Hong Kong because this is their private property. Now you are depriving them of the private property. Today we talk about ivory. What about money tomorrow, shares, company shares tomorrow, or property tomorrow? This has never happened before. In 1949, I mean, in the mainland, we know the history. What happened to properties owned before 1949? Do we support it? You have a system of registration. You know the quantity, you know the serial numbers. And we have people investing in the business. Are you going to deprive them of the property? I don't agree. Well, you look very firm just now in suggesting that no compensation will be made whatsoever. But do you have all the say? What about those affected? I'll give time for the administration to respond. Mr. Tong. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Member, for the question. I gave a succinct reply just now. First of all, responding to the Bills Committee's request, we will provide the legal advice from the DOJ on why this proposal does not contravene the Basic Law, especially on the ownership of private property in Article 105 of the Basic Law. Second point, we announced a new initiative at the end of last year, and we have been discussing with the trade, and we still have several years' time before the legal ban is put in place. And meanwhile, ivory businessmen can still carry on legal ivory trading activities in Hong Kong. We wish to disseminate the message to the trade as soon as possible for it to adjust. As for compensation, some members proposed ex gratia payment. But as I explained just now, we've heard a lot of views. We've also taken into account the international practice, especially countries or places where ivory trade ban is already in place, and So far, we have not heard of any compensation arrangement in these countries. This is one major consideration of the SAR government. Any form of compensation may cause this confusion in the market. And as pointed out just now, in the global market, we've already heard about confusing messages, and that has led to elephant poaching. And also the crackdown yesterday with unprecedentedly large quantities of ivory being imported into Hong Kong. We need to deal with these issues, and as such, as policy consideration, we considered that no form of compensation should be made out to the traders. I'll allow Ms. Claudia Mo to ask her question first, and I'll allow you to follow up on that point. Ms. Claudia Mo, at the public hearing in June, I recall that one speaker spoke in Putonghua or in English. I don't recall, but it was very touching when it comes to ivory carving or sculpture. The individual spoke in Putonghua, right? The real art doesn't lie with ivory, but the craftsmanship. So, well, it may be off the track, but I'd like to ask the administration this question. We have the craftsmanship, we have the craftsmen in the trade. Will you encourage them to practice their craft on other materials, tortoise shells, for example, so that this kind of craft will not be lost? P.S. I thank the member for the question. The AFCD believes that there are still around 100 such ivory craftsmen in the market. And about the point you raised, this is something that we're seriously considering. And the department is actually working with the employee retraining board on the relevant courses. Some craftsmen are actually quite aged, but we believe that their crafts can be applied to different materials. And the AFCD will continue to work with them, and there are suitable courses that will help them transform their skills on other materials. My other question is this. I mentioned earlier.
It is only to make the thing difficult to obtain. 應該係 Mark Twain 係馬克吐溫名言。
And this is the famous quote from Mark Twain. The more you wish to ban something, the more valuable that thing becomes. Because Hong Kong is the ivory trading hub. So after introducing the total ban, do you think that the black market will thrive? Mr. Tong. One proposal in the bill is that apart from the ban, we also increase the penalties for trading wildlife, including elephant ivory. We've substantially increased the penalties, including the imprisonment term. Well, it depends on the sentence meted out by the court, but the point is we wish the public to understand that Hong Kong attaches great importance to this initiative, and the AFCD and the Customs and Excise Department will, after the bill comes into effect, conduct inspections and also random checks, and if we have sufficient evidence, we'll take enforcement action. Well, can you explain that the maximum penalty is $10 million and imprisonment of 10 years, equivalent to any serious crime? Any follow-up question from Ms. Claudia Mo? No. Mr. Peter Chiu. Now, my question for the deputy director is this. In the past, we had ivory smuggling cases, and what was the maximum sentence meted out? What's the maximum fine? Mr. Chen? About ivory smuggling cases, as far as imprisonment was concerned, an imprisonment of a few months was imposed. Well, that's about what quantity of ivory smuggled for imprisonment of a few months. According to the tariff, in recent years, we have not seen a lot of smuggling cases involving large quantities. Usually, they would hide it in vests.
Mr. Oh, please allow the official to answer the question. Well, for the largest quantity, I can also provide the statistics to members with regard to the penalty being imposed on all the cases. I believe that the longest sentencing was several months of imprisonment, and there was also an undercover operation. Well, for ivory chopsticks, well, several $1,000s fine was imposed. Well, Chairman, that's the crux of the matter. Because for members of the public, if they all believe that this is not to be tolerated, then you should have imposed a much heavier penalty. You could have imprisoned him for 10 years. But then if the imprisonment term is only for several months, and in some cases just several $1,000s fine was imposed. All right, for the law-abiding citizens, you're telling them that, okay, they would not be allowed to do it any further. Okay, the grace period would be 5 years. Okay, if you announce that, well, for HSBC stocks, well, is priced at $73 today. All right, in 5 years, if you're going to suspend trading, then will people be buying that at all? So, right from the beginning, what I've been saying is that you're trying to penalize people who have not broken the law, because there are people who are robbing, and some people are robbing gold bars. Okay, there are many people who are robbing gold bars, and as a result of that, you're banning gold altogether. So what about those who have bought gold before? Well, if gold has never been a valuable commodity, then that's fine. You have to protect the elephants and also these people's livelihood. These are two different matters. Okay, for people who smuggle things in, then you could have imposed a more hefty sentence on them. So you should have asked the judge why they have imposed such a linear sentence on those who have broken the law. So for the law-abiding citizens, they will be suffering as a result of other people doing illicit business. All right, you're telling us that in 5 years you should only keep it at home, and you would not be allowed to engage in trading. So how much can they store at home? This is a different thing. All right, I do want to protect the elephants. I also want that to happen. Okay, so I would support you if you imprison them for 10 years. So who are they? They are a couple. Are they just scum? So you'd be causing trouble to others. These are law-abiding people, and you should not be hurting them. All right, you say that you're not robbing people's property. But then what about Sir Ho Tong? Okay, for conservation's sake, you're also taking it over. So if you dare to do it, then why don't you just do it? People can jail you, can institute judicial reviews against you. So is it that for the small group of people in Hong Kong, well, there are about 100 or so out there, so are we going to just ignore them? So are you going to just impose a ban as you wish? So we are not saying that we should be importing more elephant ivories into Hong Kong. I'm just saying that for those who have had such stock, then if you just impose the ban, what is going to happen to these people? Just think about it. Put yourself in their shoes. Well, there are people who have retired, all right? They have kept ivory items. They think that these are very valuable commodities, and therefore they are keeping it. All right, it's like HSBC stocks. Okay, today is priced at $73. What if it's suspended tomorrow? Then it becomes valueless. It becomes worthless. So these people would be prepared to support you. Okay, we have one pro-establishment camp here, and that pro-establishment camp has no chance of becoming a chairman. We have two pan-democrats here. So you know full well what is going to happen. Do you need the administration to respond to you, Mr. Orr? Well, I've already reiterated the stance of the administration, and I'd also like to say that, well, between September and December 2016, there was at a conference of the convention, it passed a revision to the resolution so that all parties to the convention within their jurisdiction, if there is still a lawful domestic market, and if those domestic markets might have resulted in unlawful or illegal smuggling and poaching of elephants, they should enforce the law more stringently in order to close those domestic markets. So we are moving in that direction. As to some members' suggestion that we should consider offering compensation to the traders, I've already repeatedly stated that we have considered many factors. We believe that that is not a feasible way out. Ms. Tanya Chen. All right, Shu Ka-fai, I'm going to extend the meeting by 15 minutes at most, and if you have further comments to make, you'll be allowed a chance to do so later. Yes, Mr. Shu Ka-fai is trying to fight for the interests of the 100 or so traders. But then if you look at his argument, I think what's most interesting is that, okay, can the administration explain to us what's the current penalty under the law right now? Who is going to answer the question? Dr. So? Well, under the current law, it's rather complicated, okay? For anybody who is involved in trading in Appendix 1 species, okay, so we're referring to ivory, okay, for anybody who is engaged in the trading of ivory, well, whether or not there are commercial elements in the offense. If there is no commercial element, then the maximum fine would be $100,000 and an imprisonment of 1 year. And if the prosecution can prove that there is commercial element in the case, then the penalty can be raised to $5 million fine and 2 years imprisonment. Ms. Tanya Chen. Well, I can see Mr. Shiu said that, okay, you can just send him to jail for 10 years. I'll be in favor of it. But then the maximum term would be 2 years. So how can we not amend the legislation? And if Mr. Shiu supports judicial independence, then I would be very concerned because, all right, if I don't think you're doing the right thing, then you can just get a judge to sentence him more heftily. But then the prosecution has to look at the case and also the penalty. And if the prosecution is not happy, then he can also sort it out in court. There are relevant procedures. And apparently Mr. Shiu is suggesting that we should go after the judge who has made the wrong judgment. But then on the issue of compensation, individuals have different views, and we have already been given a chance to fully express our views. And I believe that the administration will be able to look at what happened in the past few years with regard to trading of a commercial nature and those that did not have a commercial nature. Well, how many prosecutions have been taken out and how many were successful and what's the penalty and so on. And if it's possible, then also do let us know the quantity or the amount involved. But then when you appear before the court, the only thing that you can do is to ask for mitigation, but then after you have sought mitigation, then sometimes the sentencing might be changed. But then if there is a starting point in terms of sentencing, I'd welcome the administration raising this because when it involves drug, if different quantities are involved and also different types, there would be different starting points for sentencing. So if the administration has a more consistent approach on this, please do let us know. Mr. Tong? Yes, we'll provide the information later in writing. Next, Mr. Hui Chi-fung. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think by the time when we enter clause-by-clause examination, we will also be touching on this. But then I'd just like to ask for the direction. Well, according to the government's paper, for the full ban, that will be imposed. That will be done in 3 stages. But then in the paper, at every step of the way, it refers to the situation whereby the director might also offer a waiver so that permit can also be issued until the time when a full ban has been imposed. Okay, so the director will reserve this discretionary power. So why do we need that discretionary power? And on what circumstances would the director be expected to exercise that discretion? Will many people be applying for that discretion? And as a result, the director might think that each and every case will be very exceptional. So would that be in line with the international practice? Thank you, Mr. Hui, for your question. I'll be giving a brief reply, and then for the details, I'll defer to Dr. So. Well, the so-called exceptional circumstances, well, the director will not be exercising his discretion arbitrarily, all right, for scientific research and for education. Well, those would be regarded as exceptional situations, and the discretion will not be exercised lightly. As I refer to the scientific research and education purposes, well, those would also be in line with the international practice. Yes, Dr. So? Or Mr. Chen? Yes, thank you, Chairman. Let me supplement. Well, sometimes we do have some exceptional circumstances. For example, if it's an inheritance situation whereby ivory would be passed on from an individual to another individual. For example, if somebody wants to emigrate, then he can also take the ivory with him. And also, in a case whereby it's part of the estate, and therefore the ivory will also have to be passed on to another person, and in those circumstances we would have to issue a re-export license, and those would also require licenses. So only such situations will be considered. Can I follow up further, Mr. Hui? Yes. Just now, the administration said that the way it is drafted, this is also in line with international practice. But still, I'll be very concerned. You talk about inheritance and also scientific research. Will that become a loophole? Because, well, they might be transferring that in the name of inheritance or scientific research. Would you be worried that that might happen? Mr. Tong? Yes, we will be absolutely mindful of that. Because we believe that those are very special circumstances. Still, people might still try to take advantage of such loopholes. Therefore, in future enforcement, we'll be looking at each and every case very carefully. We'll be looking at the quantity and also the number of times. For example, there is no reason why this particular gentleman or this particular company will be inheriting ivory stocks from another party. So we'll be maintaining very close liaison with our counterparts elsewhere in order to collect intelligence. Yes, our AFCD colleagues, anything to add? Yes, Mr. Kwan? Dr. So? Well, all I'd like to say is that under the legislation, well, under the existing legislation or under the amendment bill, the director of AFCD cannot act in contravention of the convention in issuing the licenses. In other words, even if the director were to exercise his discretionary power, rest assured he will not be breaching the international convention. Okay, next, Shu Ka-fai. Thank you, Chairman. Well, if you try to be strict about anything, then they'll try to do it more carefully, and if you're more relaxed about this, then they would be prepared to do it more rampantly. I think that applies to everything. It's like teaching a kid, and if you do not scold him if he does anything wrong, then he'll be prepared to do whatever he likes. Okay, so if the maximum penalty is 2 years, is too light, then of course you will have to change it. You can also sentence him to 30 years. If there is capital punishment, then I would be in favor of it, because they are doing things outrageously. I was somewhat irritated when I look at the current situation. All right, you have said a lot about this, and Tanya Chen, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, I talk about 2 years, but then you said that the maximum penalty that was imposed was only several months. So was it light or was it heavy? Okay, the sentence was light because you were kind of accommodating, and ultimately the power rests with the judge, and of course it's up to the judge to decide on the sentencing, and he could decide it independently. But then this is an indicator. You're telling people that smuggling ivory into Hong Kong would not be a big deal. So would I be supporting such illicit activities? No, of course not. But then the thing is, apparently those who break the law can escape scot-free, but then those who are law-abiding are there to suffer. So it's the trade that is suffering. You're punishing or penalizing the trade. So I'd like to put this to the Permanent Secretary. If everything is passed today and there is a full ban in future, can you guarantee that in Hong Kong there will be no ivory imported or coming into Hong Kong? What if it comes into Hong Kong? Can you guarantee that there will be no ivory smuggling into Hong Kong? Can that be 100% guarantee? Permanent Secretary. Thank you for your question. Of course, there is no way that we can fully guarantee this, but then, of course, we'd like to get the consent of this council so that we can increase the penalty, and also, if the law is enacted, so that we can impose a local ban on the trading of ivory. Then for any ivory import and export that has been detected, that would be an illegal activity, and the penalty would also be pretty hefty.
We believe that there will be deterrence. And responding to the other question, well, we heard the views of the trade, we understand their concern, but I need to emphasize that we have to take action against smugglers. At the same time, if we allow trading activities in Hong Kong, that would mean that there will always be somebody trying different means to smuggle ivory in for trading purpose, and that's exactly our concern. I need to reiterate that we are targeting African and Asian elephants and the ivory products from these elephants. The global trend is that more and more more and more people are using tusks of mammals, and this is permissible under the international convention. Well, I agree. The increase in penalty is totally fine by me. I don't like those smugglers. They should be penalized. I don't like elephant poaching. I like elephants so much. But the point is, I'm referring to, those unscrupulous smugglers. If you don't pay a compensation, what about live chicken vendors? In the past, because of the avian flu, etc., those vendors had their licenses revoked, and they received compensation. And that's because of the government's measure. Well, if you say that, well, all along, chicken is banned in Hong Kong, or if you're talking about something illegal like opium den, then all along it's not allowed, and there, of course, should not be any compensation. Whereas for the ivory trade, if no compensation is made, I think that this is no different from taking away their private property. And Mrs. Ip is not here. She is otherwise engaged, but she has told me that even for the Palace Museum, they do have display of ivory artifacts. I think we can have an exhibition of ivory for enjoyment by the future generations. You can acquire those artifacts for future generations' enjoyment. Why don't you give this a thought? For the government to take any action relating to acquisition or making compensation to the trade, I believe very likely a very confusing message will be sent out to the international market such that elephant poaching may become more serious, or there will be an increase in ivory smuggling activities in Hong Kong for trade. And that is why we're taking such a prudent approach. We don't think that the trade should be compensated, but we do allow a 5-year grace period for them to transform their business. But my question is, according to the trade, there are about 70 tons of ivory that haven't been sold, and they remain in Hong Kong, and they have been registered with you. I want to know whether you have pictures taken and whether you have the register. Well, that depends on the pre-convention or post-convention ivory. I'll defer to Dr. So to explain to you. We are gradually stepping up our regulatory effort. Back then, when the first batch of ivory was registered, we only referred to documentary proof about the ownership of ivory before we issued the LP. And when the license was due to expire, we would renew the license, and we take a risk-based assessment or risk-based approach in conducting random checks. Because of the poaching activities around the world, actually after the 90s, when globally trade bans were imposed, the relevant illegal activities died down somewhat, and we therefore reduced our effort in conducting sampling checks. However, recently, because it was time for a large-scale renewal exercise, poaching activities revived, and we therefore conducted checks on each and every consignment. So it's 100% rate sample check. But I hope that members would understand that there are different aspects of the trade. There is a so-called commercial ownership of ivory without any really active trading. And we're referring to, for example, retired craftsmen or traders. They do have some stock of ivory they place at home. So in terms of license renewal and checks, it took us quite some time. The other group is open display of ivory for trading in commercial premises. You may note such shops in the market, and on a careful look you may find that these shops don't just focus on the sale of ivory products. They also have other sculptures and other pre-convention ivory, and also mammal tusks. I'm sorry, Chairman. My question was very simple just now. I asked whether you have kept records and taken pictures of ivory products. Why are you talking about the mammoth tusks you're extending the meeting by 15 minutes. Well, time is up anyway, and we still have Ms. Claudia Mo waiting to ask questions. That's a very simple question. I asked this question because back then we had 400 tons of ivory in the market, and it was said that just trade the 400 tons and that's all. And that is the direction. Why is it that despite the register and records with pictures of ivory taken, you still haven't done it? If you have been keeping records and taking pictures, then you can just allow the sale of this quantity of ivory, and that's the end of the matter. Because if you have not done your gatekeeping job properly, you continue to allow smuggling of ivory into Hong Kong. And then you can, in fact, you could just check against your record and the pictures taken. All right, time is up. In short, Deputy Director, lacks monitoring. Do you agree? We do take pictures for every ivory item, not every item, because if we check the stock, you can see that many of them are fragments of ivory and raw ivory. For example, ivory chopsticks. After taking pictures, it could be mixed with chopsticks made of other materials. You can't really distinguish them. Well, never mind about that. Let's say if the owner of the chopsticks then switch it for chopsticks or another material, then that is still ivory. Well, we have only 5 minutes left, Miss Claudia Mo. Make it short. I'd like to pick up on Ms. Ted Hoi's point on the director to exercise his discretion to allow exemption. I understand that for those emigrating outside Hong Kong, you may need to issue an exemption, whereas for inheritance, since you have imposed a trading ban, and that those ivory products will carry no commercial value anyway. Why are you treating these cases as an exemption? Third point, let's say I have a dozen pairs of ivory chopsticks, and I also have a baby grand with piano keys made of ivory. Then when I emigrate to another country, or when I pass it on as inheritance, would this cause a major problem? Who would take the question? Only 3 minutes, only 2 minutes. Well, very briefly, you talk about inheritance. We need to issue a certificate because around the world, because of the trade ban, if it's exported outside Hong Kong, you need a certificate. Let's say if you take it to the United States, we need to issue a certificate. What about inheritance, import, and export? These are different matters. So inheritance is all right, whereas for import, export, that may be another issue. Let's say for some ivory products such as piano keys, these are antique ivory, and this bill allows exemption for antique ivory. Right, exemption as long as it comes with a certificate. We need to pass this room to the District Council for meeting at 10:45. We cannot further extend the meeting, so let's have another meeting. Thank you.